compete on an even playing field and allow the imposition of countervailing duties to make sure that we have free principles, free marketplace principles in place and protect our American workers and protect our American job creators. And for that, I wholeheartedly support and stand with hard-working taxpayers across this country and yield back the balance of my time and ask all colleagues to join in support of this resolution and legislation.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I now yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from New York, our ranking member on the Rules Committee, Ms. Slaughter.
Gentlelady from New York, recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. This is very important legislation we're doing here today, because in December, the Federal Court of Appeals wrongly determined that the Commerce Department does not have the authority to respond to illegal Chinese subsidies with countervailing duties. The Court said that despite illegal action from the Chinese, we as a nation are unable to respond as we wish to stop the loss of thousands of American jobs. This Court decision would have immediately reversed 23 import duties that protect 80,000 American workers from subsidized goods entering our market. In addition, it would have halted 6 pending U.S. investigations into unfair trade practices while costing the taxpayers billions of dollars each year. Quite simply, allowing this decision to stand would unilaterally disarm our nation as one of the most important weapons we have in combating the subsidized Chinese exports. In the world of global trade, our nation can ill afford to let any country assume an unfair and illegal advantage. Countless American companies from Rochester, New York to Detroit, Michigan rely upon a level playing field to compete and win. From the day of this court ruling, I've been working closely with my colleagues on Ways and Means to reverse the decision, and I am so happy to support today's bipartisan legislation. Tens of thousands of working Americans are counting on Congress today to reverse the court decision, preserve the ability of our country to respond to illegal trade. I want to thank Chairman Camp and Ranking Member Levin for the good work that they have done in working together to reach an agreement that stands up for American manufacturers, and I urge all of my colleagues to support this critical legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
This time I'll reserve until closing.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I yield myself the balance of our time.
Gentleman is recognized.
The need is clear. The answer is clear. I hope the vote will be clear. I yield back.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Just in summary to say that an identical bill to this passed the Senate with unanimous consent. The ability of the U.S. to impose countervailing duties on non-market economies, specifically on China, was something China agreed to when it entered the WTO. There are massive subsidies that distort the free market and cost us jobs here in the United States. This is an important tool, as so many have said, as speakers today have said, for us to have to address unfair subsidies from China that hurt our U.S. workers. And I think this is an important bill. It has bipartisan support, and I urge the passage of this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back, and the question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4105? Those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed say nay. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. Gentleman from Michigan.
Ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Utah seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 570 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 116, House Resolution 570, resolved that at any time after the adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 2842 to authorize all Bureau of Reclamation conduit facilities for hydropower development under federal reclamation law and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Minority Member of the Committee on Natural Resources. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. It shall be in order to consider as an original bill for the purpose of amendment under the 5-minute rule the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Natural Resources now printed in the bill. Each section of the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be considered as read. All points of order against the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute are waived. No amendment to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute shall be in order except one. Those received for printing in the portion of the congressional record designated for that purpose in Clause 8 of Rule 18, dated at least 1 day before the date of consideration of the amendment, and 2, pro forma amendments for the purpose of debate. Each amendment so received may be offered only by the member who caused it to be printed or a designee and shall be considered as read if printed. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. Any member may demand a separate vote in the House on any amendment adopted in the Committee of the Whole to the bill or to the committee amendment in the nature of a substitute. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2. The Chair of the Committee on Financial Services is authorized on behalf of the committee to file a supplemental report to accompany H.R. 3606.
The gentleman from Utah is recognized for 1 hour.
Madam Speaker, for the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Slaughter, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During the consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for purpose of debate or debate only. And, Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
This resolution provides a modified open rule for the consideration of H.R. 2842, succinctly titled the Bureau of Reclamation Small Conduit Hydropower Development and Rural Jobs Act of 2011. It provides for 1 hour of general debate equally divided between and controlled by the chairman and ranking member of the Committee on Natural Resources, and makes in order all amendments which were pre-printed in the congressional record and which otherwise comply with the rules of the House. So this modified open rule is a very fair and generous rule, continuation of the work of Chairman Dreyer and the Rules Committee, and will provide for a balanced and open debate on the merits of the bill. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to stand before the House today in support of this rule, as well as the underlying legislation, H.R. 2842. I appreciate the hard work of the bill's chief sponsor, Mr. Tipton of Colorado, as well as Mr. Gosar of Arizona, one of the co-sponsors. Representative McClintock of California, who was the chairman of the subcommittee that held the hearings on this bill, and of course Chairman Hastings of the Resource Committee brought this bill forward as one of the companion pieces of the myriad of pieces of legislation which, if enacted, would greatly improve our nation's energy policy and provide for responsible and a balanced approach to further domestic energy development. With that, Madam Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves his time. The gentlelady from New York.
I thank the gentleman from Utah for yielding me the customary 30 minutes. Yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Madam Speaker, in my home state of New York, unemployment continues to remain stubbornly high. Thousands of Americans have given up looking for work altogether. For many, unemployed benefits have expired, and there's little hope that a paycheck will soon be a regular part of daily life. But despite this dire economic reality, once again we are going through a bill that has nothing to do with job creation. Instead, we have a piecemeal proposal after piecemeal proposal to do more than further ideological goals and create jobs. Instead of creating jobs, today's bill would clarify lines of authority for 2 government agencies. Is this a worthy goal? Maybe. Some say yes, but does it create thousands of American jobs? The answer is clearly no. And as they have with so many other bills, the majority has also inserted unnecessary partisan language into today's bill language that attacks existing environmental law for no good reason. Specifically, it provides a categorical exemption for all small hydropower projects from National Environmental Policy Act compliance. There is no clear reason for this exemption from environmental protection. Currently, hydropower projects that don't raise substantive environmental concerns have always been approved relatively quickly. From 2006 to 2010, 13 exemptions were completed in less than a year each, and in 2011 there were 9 exemptions that were granted an average of 40 days. Yet despite seeing a system that works relatively well, the majority decided to once again put industry before the environment and include this controversial provision. This approach may fill a legislative calendar, but it fails to create jobs for the American people. We could be considering a 5-year surface transportation bill, which everybody's waiting for, something we were supposed to consider weeks ago. A well-written and bipartisan bill, and all the transportation bills from Eisenhower administration up to now were always bipartisan bills, would have created thousands of American jobs. But once again, no such bill has come to the floor. Instead, they were forced to pull a proposed surface transportation bill because they had alienated members of their own party with extreme provisions that would decimate public transportation and fail to create jobs. Now we continue to wait as the majority works to write a reasonable transportation bill that will actually create jobs. In the meantime, we consider bill after bill that does nothing to create the many thousands of jobs that are so desperately needed. Madam Speaker, the record is clear. When the majority pushes partisan politics over good governance, the American people lose. And today is the latest in a long line of such partisan bills, and yet one more day when the American people will go without new American jobs. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The lady reserves the balance of her time. The gentleman from Utah.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California who was the chair of the subcommittee that heard this particular bill, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California, recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, this rule brings to the floor one of the most simple and sensible bills on energy development that we have yet heard. It's H.R. 2842, offered by the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton. What it promises is this: at precisely no cost to taxpayers, freeing up absolutely clean electricity on a scale so vast that it would take several hydroelectric dams to duplicate. Simply by relaxing the regulatory stranglehold, simply by getting government bureaucracies out of the way, this bill has the potential of adding thousands of megawatts of absolutely clean and renewable electricity to the nation's energy supply, reducing utility bills, reducing reliance on fossil fuels, and, to answer the gentlelady from New York, adding thousands of permanent, high-paying jobs to the nation's economy. All that is necessary for this to happen is for government bureaucrats to get out of the way and allow people to place small hydroelectric generators in thousands of miles of existing pipelines, canals, and aqueducts. This doesn't involve new construction. The facilities are already there. It doesn't involve any adverse impact to the environment. These are water pipes and canals in which there are no fish of any kind, and yet this administration forces water users and developers to go through a lengthy, costly, and pointless environmental review process that literally doubles the cost of these projects and makes them cost prohibitive. The reason there are so few applications is because the requirements of this absurd law simply make these projects cost prohibitive, and it simply doesn't make sense to move forward with them. And this bill simply says this: you don't need to go through that nonsense anymore. Now, why isn't this bill being taken up on suspension? It would be one of the all-time no-brainers. It passed the Natural Resources Committee on a bipartisan vote. The reason that this debate is required is because this common-sense legislation is vigorously opposed by the environmental left. That is the measure of extremism from which this movement now suffers. And perhaps the best way to alert the American people to this extremism is through debate that this rule makes possible. You know, a generation ago, in the 1960s, electricity was so cheap that some communities didn't even bother with electricity meters. And there's a reason for that. In those days, we were building hydroelectric dams that not only protected us from floods and droughts, but that delivered electricity for as little as 3 cents per kilowatt hour. At that price, an average household's electricity bill would come to about $30 a month. That dream seems surreal today. Today, government regulations are literally threatening the ability of this nation to generate sufficient electricity to keep people's air conditioning and refrigerators running in the summer, just as similar policies prevent Americans from prospering from our vast petroleum reserves and nuclear power potential. It's no coincidence that the states with the most stringent regulations also have the highest electricity prices and the sickest economies. People of my state of California, the land of vast unrealized hydroelectric potential and a pioneer in nuclear power, now use less electricity per capita than any other state in the Union, and yet we pay among the highest electricity prices in the country. And we also suffer from one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, despite ceaseless, empty promises of green jobs. Now along comes this bill by Mr. Tipton of Colorado. It does everything the environmental left claims it likes. It produces absolutely clean and renewable electricity in vast quantities at precisely no cost to taxpayers. It requires no new construction. All that's necessary to achieve this is to put small generators in existing pipelines and canals that have already passed environmental review and pose no conceivable environmental impact. Yet, instead of embracing this measure, these radical elements instead throw a conniption fit. Well, let them do that in public. Let the American people see this debate. Let them see for themselves the nihilistic ideology behind this movement and how it is practiced by those in this Congress who share and support it, and then let the American people judge. I think the debate over this bill will offer our fellow citizens a real insight into this movement, and I support the resolution that makes this debate possible. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, and I hope we will, I'm going to offer an amendment to the rule to provide that immediately after the House adopts the rule, we'll bring up H.R. 964, the Federal Price Gouging Prevention Act. And to talk about our proposal, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Andrews.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Madam Speaker, 180 days ago, the President of the United States came to this chamber and laid out before the country and the Congress some very specific proposals to help put Americans back to work. The President proposed that we give a tax cut to small businesses who hire people. The House has never voted on that proposal. The President proposed that at a time when our bridges and roads and airports and ports need construction and reconstruction, that we put Americans back to work in the construction industry performing those vitally necessary tasks. The House has never voted on that proposal. At a time when police officers and firefighters and teachers are being laid off across our country, the President proposed some short-term relief, so we should put our officers back on the beat, our firefighters back on the apparatus, our teachers back in the classroom. The House has never voted on that proposal. So here we are, 6 months later, doing what we're doing today. Now, in that 6 months, another crisis has manifested itself, one that affects Americans across our country more severely every day. And that is each time they fill up their vehicle, it takes just a little bit more money out of their grocery budget, the utility budget, what they use to pay their mortgage payment, what they use to educate their children. The rising price of gasoline is a serious threat to the prosperity and stability of American families. Now, the president of Exxon has said that his conclusion is that about $30 of the cost of a barrel of crude oil is attributable to the speculation of prices by people who never really buy, sell, or use oil, but who bet on its price. Casino gamblers, not deliverers of oil. Goldman Sachs estimates that anywhere from $22 to $28 a barrel is also due to speculation, and they ought to know, because they're no doubt participating in it. The bill that we would propose be put on the floor this afternoon would crack down on that speculation. It would require that trades be disclosed. It would empower regulatory agencies to identify illegal price manipulation behavior and reduce the price of crude oil to American consumers. Now, there are other ways to do this. I, for one, favor increased domestic production. I think there are ways that we can increase the natural gas and coal and oil that we produce. I certainly think that we should expand renewables as well. But there is one regulatory tool that we have not given our regulators, and we ought to give it to them here. So the underlying bill is certainly worthy of consideration. But we have an immediate energy problem here in America, and an immediate jobs problem. And I would respectfully suggest that the right vote is to defeat the previous question, so we may move on and consider legislation that would deal with the current crisis of gasoline prices. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah.
I am pleased to yield 3 minutes to the sponsor of this particular bill, who will talk about how to create real power using water resources that we have, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton.
Gentleman from Colorado, recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I request the ability to revise and extend my remarks.
The gentleman's recognized.
As sponsor of this bipartisan legislation, I support the rule on H.R. 2842, and I encourage an open debate because I believe the merits of this bill will speak for themselves. H.R. 2842 is a bipartisan plan to authorize new hydropower production and streamline the regulatory process in order to create new American jobs. Many rural water and irrigation districts and electric utilities in western states seek to develop hydropower on Bureau of Reclamation water canals and pipelines, but overburdensome and unnecessary regulations stand in the way and discourage investment in these projects. Most of these small projects are not currently authorized by Bureau of Reclamation canals, and as a result, they never get off the ground. Those that are currently authorized are subject to an additional review process under the National Environmental Policy Act, and even though the canals on which they are built have already gone through a full environmental review when they were constructed or rehabilitated. H.R. 2842 authorizes production of hydropower at all Bureau of Reclamation conduits, and by doing so, it allows placement of small hydropower generators on existing man-made canals and pipes that have already gone through the NEPA process. This authorization does not currently exist, and therefore hydropower development under current reclamation law will not happen unless Congress acts. This bill also eliminates duplicative red tape by exempting small hydropower projects on previously disturbed ground from going through an additional NEPA review. This bill does not apply to rivers, large dams, or natural flowing waters in any way, and it will not impact endangered fish or wildlife. In many cases, having to go through an additional unnecessary review process determines whether or not a hydropower project is economically feasible, and as a result, determining whether or not this country moves forward with the development of green energy. Chris Trees of the Colorado Water District and the Natural Resources Committee testified on this bill, and he stated, environmental reviews under NEPA are universally time-consuming and expensive. The River District's current experience with the environmental assessment is a non-construction action has taken over a year and nearly $1 million in outside expenses. By eliminating this duplicative requirement, we can add power to the grid, provide an environment for job growth in rural America, and return revenues to the Treasury. This common-sense piece of legislation has bipartisan co-sponsorship and passed out of the committee with bipartisan support. It's also been endorsed by the rural irrigators and electric utilities that operate the Bureau of Rec Canals and know the issue best. These organizations include the Family Farm Alliance, National Water Resources Association, the American Public Power Association, and the Association of California Water Agencies. I'm proud to offer this contribution to the House Republicans of the all of the above energy strategy for America, and I look forward to a spirited discussion on how we can produce more renewable energy and put our people in this country back to work. I yield back.
Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Bishop.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I rise in opposition to the rule and in support of moving the previous question. This motion would amend the bill with strong provisions to stop price gouging at the gas pumps. We really are long overdue for a serious debate about gas prices. Scoring political points on this issue may make us all feel good, but it serves no one, particularly our constituents, and it certainly doesn't get us any closer to solving the problem. Here are the facts. Domestic production of oil in the United States is at an 8-year high. Imports of oil into the United States are at a 17-year low. More oil rigs drill in the United States today than in the rest of the world combined. Let me say that again. More oil rigs at work in the United States today drilling for oil than in the rest of the world combined. The number of oil rigs in operation in the United States today has quadrupled since President Obama took office. Last year, the U.S. became a net exporter of oil for the first time in 62 years. I think what these facts demonstrate very clearly is that this is not a supply-driven problem, nor, as good as it might feel to some, is this a problem that can be blamed on the administration for not doing enough to facilitate or encourage exploration or drilling. This is not a demand-driven problem either. Demand is down 6.5% in just 1 year and 17% since 2008. There are several factors that contribute to rising gas prices, but U.S. supply and U.S. demand are not among them. The gas prices in my district of eastern Long Island are up over 60 cents per gallon in just a matter of weeks. Rampant speculation accounts for most of that, with over 60% of the market controlled by speculators. And the speculators' overriding goal is profit-taking, which is what our legislation targets. Now, there's nothing wrong with profits. Profits are what made our nation strong. But when profits are pursued at the expense of middle-class families or at the expense of our fragile economic recovery, we need to take action. This legislation makes sure that profits don't make sure that we do cut out speculators. It strengthens penalties for manipulating the market, which forces up gas prices and leads to price gouging. And after we cut out speculators, we should cut out the subsidies for big oil. And we should reinvest those dollars in a long-term strategy focused on clean and renewable sources. Mr. Speaker, our debate should focus on a green energy policy free of market speculation and subsidies our nation can't afford. We must tackle this problem rather than using it to point fingers and try to score points. Thus, I encourage my colleagues to vote no on the previous question and to vote no on the rule. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Utah.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, I have no further request for time. May I require my colleague if he's ready to close?
I am.
Then I shall go ahead and close. Thank you. Madam Speaker, millions of Americans remain out of work. Countless more have run out of unemployment assistance, and meanwhile gas prices continue to rise on every American family, and they are turning to us for much-needed relief. Today's bill does nothing to address these pressing economic issues. Instead, we're doing more busy work on the floor today, preparing to consider a bill that clarifies the responsibility for two government agencies. This type of bill does little to create the many thousands of jobs needed to begin reviving our economy. I urge my colleagues to end the long delay and finally bring forth true American job creation legislation so that American families can live with some hope. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
and I urge my colleagues to vote no, defeat the previous question, and I urge a no vote on the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman from Utah.
Madam Chairman, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
I am grateful that we have found new sources of energy, specifically oil and natural gas, on private property, because it has not allowed the federal government to stop the development of those, and that is the growth that we have seen in recent times. However, it is interesting to note that the bill before us, which deals with hydropower and development of more hydropower, is a bipartisan bill, and for just cause. We can both agree on both sides of the aisle that there is a great need for more energy, and that greater, cheaper energy is vital to the growth of the economy and the growth of jobs. That's what this bill tries to do. Frequently on this House, we have brought bills that have tried to increase our offshore drilling on federal property. We have talked about the Keystone Pipeline and the ability of 20,000 high-paying jobs if it were just permitted. We have talked about trying to increase domestic energy production on public lands that have been put off limits by this particular administration. Those efforts we have dealt with. We have passed through this House. They're over sitting on the Senate waiting for action. And today, we add to that effort with a significant bill that will add to our hydropower and hydro energy that once again comes along with this. But the problem that we have, and the reason why this bill is here before us, if I can summarize, is simply our efforts to add this kind of energy to our portfolio are being stopped by special interest groups and, unfortunately, layers of bureaucracy. It was Nelson Rockefeller who came up with the great line of calling the deadening hand of bureaucracy on proposals and programs. And indeed, we see that and we feel it today as we are having a harder time trying to be energy independent, and we are feeling the results of the federal government's program to stop energy production on federal lands and federal property every time we fill up our cars and, unfortunately, every time we pay our electrical bills. Now, it is bureaucratic manipulation that is causing this problem and why this bill is here. Look, it was the energy debate and the energy bill of 2005 that told the federal government to move forward in this area with making sure that we had a master plan for hydrological development of energy. 7 years later, only 7 years later, now the federal government and our Department of Interior is starting to move forward in that direction, which is either the old cliche of paralysis by analysis or the fact that Rockefeller was right when he called the bureaucracy a deadening hand on programs and progress. One particular program on Klamath River took 5 years for the government to decide who actually had the authority to move forward on the project. That is the kind of bureaucratic analysis. That's the kind of red tape that is slowing back our efforts to develop this type of energy, and we need it desperately. That's why 2842 is here, to develop small projects that will add to our total energy portfolio and add to our independence. It stops and simplifies a regulatory process which unfortunately costs these small efforts, these small entities trying to make these efforts, tens of thousands of dollars just to do the paperwork. It's ridiculous. It clarifies the role of the Bureau of Reclamation on this area. And this only deals with Bureau of Reclamation projects on man-made facilities. But the jurisdictions are not clear. Some jurisdictions have been mandated by Congress, some are administrative, some are questions on whether FERC has responsibility, Bureau of Reclamation has responsibility. That is causing our slowing in developing these projects. This bill clarifies what that role is. It also clarifies NEPA, that you don't have to do a second NEPA on these small jobs. Anything greater than 1.5 megawatts of production, you do the analysis again. But for small projects on man-made property, where the land has already been disturbed and already has had an analysis done and the mitigation has already taken place, we move on and do the job. The Bureau of Reclamation does have a right of categorical exclusion, but they won't do it. All they're saying is we may start thinking about it sometime in the future. Let me give you an example. There are 3 specific projects in the neighboring state of mine. One was mandated by Congress in 1990. They are still starting the process because of that administrative red tape. 2 other projects, it took a full year for them to decide to actually start going through a process, and when they did it, they realized there was no change. It had already been done before. All you did is take a year to check off the box and do the expense with it. We had somebody from Arizona come in and testify that the administrative review cost more than the actual construction of the project. And that's silly. That is ridiculous. House Bill 795 deals with this same issue on non-federal land. This bill deals with the same issue on existing Federal Bureau of Reclamation projects. It's a common-sense development to get an untapped resource that we need to develop. It would not significantly enlarge the environmental footprint because these are already man-made entities who have already gone through the NEPA process once, and there is no rational reason to reinvent the wheel and do it a second time only to find out they were right the first time. What would we benefit from this bill? Well, first of all, new sources of clean energy to add to our portfolio. Second, we can facilitate small projects to help offset carbon-based irrigation pumping in the West. Third, it would help reduce the cost of energy. It would produce a cash flow to irrigation districts so they could actually increase and pay for and improve their aging infrastructure and modernize these water facilities. Fourth, it does create jobs, and for once, we have a bill that actually increases revenue coming into the government from this. CBO has estimated, Congressional Budget Office, that this will generate $5 million in additional revenue coming into the government. So not only can we create more energy, we can do the right thing, we can fix our infrastructure, but we actually make money that comes into the government to help with other issues. There is a reason this is a bipartisan bill, because it's the right thing to do. There is a reason why we should move forward with this bill, because it taps a valuable resource that will go to waste if we do not do it. There is a reason that this bill is here, to speed up the regulatory red tape, to cut through the cost, to make things happen and help us move forward as a nation with better energy development and energy independence. There's a whole bunch of good reasons for this bill, and that's why I support the bill, and I also support the rule that will make it possible to give a good and fair open balance to this debate. With that, this is a good bill and an incredibly fair rule, and I urge the adoption and yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
Questions on ordering the previous question? On the resolution, those in favor will signify by saying aye. Opposed will say no. The opinion of the chair is the ayes have it, the ayes have it. The gentlelady from New York.
Madam Speaker, may we please have a recorded vote?
Does the gentlelady ask for the nays and nays? Yeas and nays?
I do.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring the vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having arisen, the yeas and nays are ordered, and pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 for the proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp, to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4105, on which the yeas and nays are ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 4105, a bill to apply the countervailing duty provisions of the Tariff Act of 1930 to non-market economy countries and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This will be a 15-minute vote.
So the House holding the first roll call vote of the day, a vote on a suspension bill dealing with applying punitive tariffs on countries with non-market economies like China. Then a procedural vote related to the rule for a measure that would authorize all conduit facilities under the Bureau of Reclamation to be developed for hydropower. So 2 votes, the only votes of the day in the House here today. We've heard some members mention the passing of New Jersey Congressman Donald Payne. He passed away earlier today after a battle with colon cancer. Congressman Payne was the first black congressman from New Jersey. He was 77 at the time of his death. We expect that there will be more remarks on the floor following votes, and also a moment of silence in tribute to Congressman Payne. While this vote is underway here in the House, President Obama is at the White House holding his first news conference of the year. He's already announced new initiatives to help those struggling with government-backed mortgages, and he has reiterated his support for Israel in its dealings with Iran, who's seeking to develop nuclear weapons. The President is also saying that the window of opportunity to use diplomacy to stop Iran from building nuclear weapons is still open. You can see the President's news conference live right now. It's on our companion network, C-SPAN 2. We will also be taking your phone calls following that news conference. Also today is Super Tuesday. There are GOP contests in 10 states. 419 delegates are at stake. Caucuses are being held in Alaska, Idaho, and North Dakota. There are primaries in Oklahoma, Tennessee, Georgia, Ohio, Virginia, Vermont, and Massachusetts. And a reminder that we will have results coverage tonight with candidate speeches. We'll also take your calls and get your reaction live on the C-SPAN networks. Earlier today, several of the Republican candidates spoke to the American Israel Public Affairs Committee's annual conference that's taking place right here in Washington. Former Pennsylvania Senator Rick Santorum spoke first.
The opportunity to be here again with my friends here at AIPAC, although this is, thank you. As you may know, this is a somewhat important day in my life today. We have a whole lot of primaries going on all across the nation, 10 of them. But I wanted to come off the campaign trail to come here because one of the reasons that I decided to run for president is because of the grave concern I have about the security of our country and the leadership of our country in the face of an existential threat to not just the state of Israel. And I think that's where a lot of the rhetoric is oriented to when we talk about the revolutionary Islamic Republic of Iran, but an existential threat to freedom-loving people throughout the world, which is what Iran is. I have been focused on the issue of a nuclear Iran for a long time. In my last campaign back in 2006, I would travel around my state and I would say, how many people have ever heard of the name Mahmoud Ahmadinejad? And no one would know. And I would always say, just wait. In a year, you'll not only know the name, you'll be able to pronounce it. I was the author at that time, as Lonnie mentioned, the Iran Freedom Support Act. And I fought President Bush, Secretary Rice, in making the claim that Iran, in fact, was developing a nuclear weapon at the time. They needed to have sanctions put in place, and we needed to have an effort on the part of the United States to engage the Iranian people who are being oppressed by this brutal regime in Tehran, and that we needed to have the United States on the side of the Iranian people to overthrow this theocracy that runs the government of Iran. I fought to have this bill passed, and I was opposed not just by President Bush, but it was filibustered on the floor by none other than Joe Biden. And it was eventually voted down with the opposition of our president, who was then in the Senate. Eventually, a weaker version of that bill eventually passed at the end of that year. But nothing was really done to confront Iran and their quest for a nuclear weapon, or to do the important role of working with people in the streets of Iran. Something that I really believed in and thought that America could play such a key role as we had in other revolutions against dictators and despots. Iran continued on its mission, not just developing nuclear weapons, but killing American troops openly, providing IEDs that have maimed and killed more Americans than any other country in the world, planning terrorist attacks, conducting terrorist attacks, supporting radical Islamist groups. All the while, the United States sat on the sidelines and did nothing, or slow-walked what was necessary to stop this regime from spreading terror and doing something even worse, developing a nuclear weapon which would provide the ultimate shield for the propagation of terror, potentially weapons of mass destruction through terrorist organizations, as well as we've seen the overhyped and overheightened rhetoric about the destruction of the State of Israel. As I've sat and watched this play out on the world stage, I've seen a president who has been reticent. He says he has Israel's back. From everything I've seen from the conduct of this administration, he has turned his back on the people of Israel. We now have an announcement today that the administration has agreed to open talks with the Iranian government. That is in spite of UN resolutions that says they must stop the processing of their nuclear fuel in order to get those negotiations. Another appeasement, another delay, another opportunity for them to go forward while we talk. Ladies and gentlemen, listening to the Prime Minister's speech last night and then listening to the President's, there is a clear and unfortunate, tragic disconnect between how the leaders of the country of Israel and the country of the United States view the exigency of this situation. Prime Minister Netanyahu was very clear. Israel is not at peace with what's going on in Iran and the process that is moving forward there. There is a concern, obvious concern, about what this administration is doing or not doing to bring this issue to a head before that final line is crossed and it is too late. That's why I believe that we need to do more than just talk. We need to set forth a clear ultimatum to the Iranian government. We need to say to the Iranian government, the time is now. You will stop your nuclear production now. You will open up your facilities for inspectors from the United States and other countries so we can certify that those efforts are stopping and being dismantled now. Any further delay from action now simply encourages the Iranian regime to take America, well, what they've done and taken America over the past several years, which is not serious about stopping them from their quest for a nuclear weapon. The fact that we had the chairman of the Joint Chiefs suggesting that we're not sure yet that Iran is really going to pursue or has made the decision to develop a nuclear weapon just shows, again, the disconnect that they know we have, the insincerity of our leaders in telling the truth to the American public about what is actually going on in Iran today, how radical this regime is, the hyper-rhetoric about not just the State of Israel, but targeting Jews in specific. Let's be honest with the American public about who these radical Islamists are who are running the government of Iran and what their intention is. Their intention is not just to control the Middle East. Their intention is not just to protect themselves from being attacked. These are radical theocrats who don't just want to destroy the State of Israel. These are radical theocrats who believe it is their destiny to not just conquer and destroy those in their ways in the Middle East, but far beyond that. These are the folks who have been very clear about what their intent. And the idea that they won't, if they do get a nuclear weapon, that they won't use it because, well, they're rational actors, as General Dempsey said. What leads you to believe that these folks are rational actors? Rational actors don't call for the destruction of other states, call them cancers, preach radical theologies. Rational actors don't send 100,000 children as minesweepers during the Iran-Iraq War. Rational actors do not develop nuclear capability, call it for nuclear power, when they have hundreds of years of oil and gas to provide for their power and their medical research. These are essentially irrational actors. We need to put that ultimatum in place, and then we need to be prepared, if that ultimatum is not met, to engage Prime Minister Netanyahu and the people of Israel in an effort to make sure that if they do not tear down those facilities, we will tear down them ourselves. This is not bellicosity and warmongering. This is preventing the most radical regime in the world from having a weapon that could fundamentally change the security posture, not just of the Middle East, but as we've seen with planned attacks here in the United States. A nuclear Iran with a nuclear shield to project terror around the world is a nightmare for all freedom-loving people in the world. Under a Santorum administration, we would find no gap between Israel and the United States because our interests are united in stopping the world from having a radical terrorist organization, which happens to be governing the state of Iran, from having a weapon that will destroy the opportunity for peace and prosperity for the world. My final point I would make to you is this. We see energy prices going up, and it's obviously caused in part by the tensions in the Middle East. I would encourage everyone here to begin to work with us to make sure that the radical environmental movement in this country does not stop the production of oil and gas in this country and pipelines that need to be built so we can become energy independent and not rely on the Middle East and bad actors for the supply of oil and gas for the world. Thank you all very much. God bless AIPAC. God bless America. Thank you.
Senator Rick Santorum from earlier today at the AIPAC conference. Mitt Romney and Newt Gingrich also addressed the group today, although they did it via satellite. We'll have Mitt Romney's remarks shortly during the next vote. By the way, you can also see those remarks anytime in the C-SPAN video library. Just go to cspan.org. Well, the House is in the midst of the first of two votes. Members right now voting on a suspension bill dealing with applying punitive tariffs to countries like China with non-market economies. Up next, there'll be a procedural vote related to the rule for debating a bill authorizing certain conduit facilities to be developed for hydropower. Should this be agreed to, there'll be an hour of general debate and debate on amendments. Votes would be postponed until tomorrow. Between the votes, we're expecting members to hold a tribute, a moment of silence, to Congressman Donald Payne from New Jersey. He died earlier today. He was battling colon cancer. Congressman Payne was 77 years old.
vote. The ayes are 368, the noes are 39.